Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today we have a pretty exciting video. We're going to be talking about every single book that I read in the last year, and the plan for the format is I've already organized them all and ranked them from the book that I enjoyed least to the one I enjoyed the most. So while I'm not going to be showing a tier list system because I've already ranked them, I'm going to be going in that order essentially. So if you want to know my favorite books, they will be at the end because we're going to start at the lowest rated books. At the bottom of my list we have my only DNF, which was The Unspoken Name by A.K. I think it is Larkwood. I don't know if I would even say that this was that bad. It was just a little bit boring, not what I was looking for at the time, and I really felt that the main character's motivation was not really there for me. Next we have Murtagh by Christopher Paolini. I've already spoken about this at length, so this will be a very abbreviated version, but essentially they kind of went the route of the sequel to the main series where they make it an even bigger baddie, and the world is all at stake again, which really I always feel invalidates the work that we did in the original series, and also we kind of butchered the character of Murtagh. It is not the same character that we got in the Inheritance Cycle. Next up is The Counselor. I really thought I was getting into a political sort of fantasy here, but it quickly turned into smut about the main characters' fantasies and kinks, which there's nothing wrong if you want to read that kind of thing, but that was not what I was looking for, and it really took the seriousness out of the political side for me when it's just constantly the main character thirsting. Then we have A Venom Steeped in Poison. This is the follow-up to A Magic Steeped in Poison, and we really just spent most of the book kind of running around doing these little side quests, and then the whole thing was wrapped up within 5 minutes when these magical artifacts heal themselves and do all the work for our main characters. Next is Invasion of the Tearling. What is it with the YA female leads and being just angry all the time? In this book, Kelsey behaved like a spoiled teenager and she couldn't admit when she was wrong. I liked the other storyline, but honestly Kelsey was just so annoying that I'm not going to be continuing the series. A Deadly Education. This is a dark academia set in a school for young magic users that's essentially supposed to protect them from demons. Again, this just suffered from a main character who is very annoying and angry. A Starry Messenger by Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is a nonfiction that really failed to make any impact on me. It was not memorable at all. I don't remember a single thing that he said, and I really felt that it lacked any sort of in-depth insights or information, The Once and Future Sex by Eleanor Janiga. This is a nonfiction about medieval women. And while it wasn't bad, I felt that we spent too much time looking at women from the men's perspective instead of with the women, which is possibly due to a lack of sources from a female perspective, but it was just a bit disappointing. Next is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I wanted to try another of her works after I read Broken Earth trilogy just to be sure how I felt about her writing, and unfortunately I still did not like it in this one, but I will say that the characterizations were very interesting. Next up is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I know this is a very beloved classic, but honestly I just did not enjoy it. I felt it was a bit boring. I was hoping we'd get more sciencey things, but it's mostly just we're in Frankenstein's head as he tries to run from his creation and also marry his adopted sister. Then we have Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the conclusion to the Broken Earth trilogy, and I honestly just wasn't really a fan of the plotting and world building in this one, but I will say that we had a really good emotional payoff at the end with the whole mother-daughter relationship that has been the focus of the trilogy. Next is Guns, Germs, and Steel. This is a nonfiction about the progression of humans from hunter-gatherers to civilizations, and why some civilizations have been able to conquer others and not the other way around. And while it was interesting for a while, it got very repetitive. He would give an example and then give the explanation that he gave for the last example, and so it's just you already told me this. A Magic Steeped in Poison. This is a YA fantasy. It was decent. I liked some of the world building elements in terms of the magic system is quite interesting because it's done through tea. However, it just kind of fell into a lot of YA typical pitfalls, the main character is just magically good at stuff. The Wager. This is a nonfiction about the shipwreck and mutiny aboard the Wager. It was interesting. It was just not my favorite. I think part of the problem was all of the people that it kind of follows do a bunch of bad things throughout the course of this, so it makes it hard to connect with them. Although, of course, I mean, this is nonfiction, there's not much they can do about that. It was just the way the story was told, it was not the most engaging. Next is The Obelisk Gate. This is book 2 of the Broken Earth trilogy. And while I did find that like the plot and characterizations were escalated / continued from the first book quite well in this one, I thought that the sort of world building was a bit confusing with the whole like the moon is part of the earth and then the earth is angry thing. I just didn't think it was very well explained, so it kind of lost me a bit. The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. I think that's how the title goes, by Brandon Sanderson, and this was just pretty middling. I liked the concept of like the world building that it was based off, but I just found the plot and characterizations to be quite middling. Next is Black Wolves by Kate Elliott. This is a more political leaning fantasy with a lot of sort of family drama. There was a big time skip at the beginning that kind of threw me off a bit and took me a while to get back into it, but I did quite enjoy it after I got back into it, you know? But there is no book 2 because it got dropped by the publisher, so I don't know if I would recommend that you read it, because you may never get the next one. Then we have Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. This is a sci-fi about first contact, and I just felt that it was thoroughly mediocre and didn't really explore anything super new on like the well done topic of first contact. It was okay. I had a decent time reading it, but I didn't bother to read the next one, you know? So take that what you will. Then we have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This is the follow-up to Chain of Iron, and I was not that fond of this one. We have sort of a little bit of a love triangle that Cassie Clare seems to love going on, but I hate love triangles. Like, I don't mind if there's like a little bit of romance sprinkled into my books now and then, but love triangles I hate, and Cassie loves them. I didn't mind some of like the plot elements in terms of like the baddies and that kind of thing, but it was just so annoying watching these like 18-year-olds like be in love and fail to communicate it. It's just so annoying. Then we have Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter. This is the continuation from Rage of Dragons, and while I felt that like the plot and sort of stakes escalated in a pretty satisfying way, we didn't get as much character development as I would have liked across the first 2 books. I really would like for Tao's motivation to develop beyond revenge, but we just haven't really gotten there yet. I also felt there were too many action scenes and not enough time spent with the characters, you know? Next is Over the Woodward Wall. This is a cute story about 2 kids who are very different from each other who end up trapped in this magical world together and are trying to find their way home. It really kind of gave me Last of the Really White Whangdoodles energy. I don't know if any of you ever read that. It could be cute to read with your kids, but I felt that it kind of lacked a bit of depth. Then we have The Bear and the Nightingale. This is a Russian folklore-inspired story about a girl who is essentially trying to stay true to herself despite outside pressures. I liked it initially after reading it, but as time has gone on, I pretty much forgot all about it, and I have not bothered to read the next one. The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. This book was relatively interesting. I just found it to be extremely derivative and lacking in a bit of originality. You follow this kind of main character who's got like chosen one energy on this quest, while a sort of generic dark one whose backstory I've already forgotten is trying to break through a magical barrier and take over the world. The Little Book of Hygge by Mike Wyking. This is a book about the Danish concept of hygge and why Danish people are happier. It was decent, it just had too much overlap with his other book, My Hygge Home, and it contained a lot of like lists and other things that didn't make it very good for being an audiobook, which is how I consumed it. So potentially in physical format, you might like it better. Next is The Body Keeps the Score. This was, for the most part, a pretty well done book about trauma and the treatment of it and the history of the development of its treatments, as well as its impact on the person suffering from it in terms of their body and their mind. Where it sort of dropped off for me, though, is I felt that there were far too many descriptions, like graphic descriptions of people's trauma, and while I understand why you might have a few to help the listener sort of understand the scope and scale of the traumas that he's talking about here, at a certain point it just kind of felt gross and voyeuristic to keep hearing these descriptions. It's like, I understand. You don't have to continue shoving these descriptions in my face. After the first few, I get it. Then we have Crossroads of Twilight by Robert Jordan, and initially I really enjoyed the setup of this book where we're jumping from character group to character group and seeing their reaction to what Rand does at the end of the previous book. However, because of this setup, we didn't really move forward in time at all, so it did feel a little bit stagnant in that regard, and I would say Matt's storyline is my favorite from this book. Golden Fool. This is the middle book in the Tawny Man trilogy, and it certainly felt like it. Fitz, my boy, while I love him, he was trying me in this book. Like, he was being so annoying, saying and doing all of the wrong things, and I wish we had spent more time sort of in his head processing his grief over the events that happened at the end of the last book. Like, I understand he's like kind of trying to repress it maybe, but it felt like he needed to deal with that in order to move on, and he just wasn't dealing with it, and it was very frustrating. Then we have A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan. This one is pretty slow again, focuses on some more small developments, although we do have some decent developments in Egwene's storyline, and she is definitely at this point my favorite character, and I would happily spend a whole book with her. Then we have A Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. So I read this one because I had heard a lot of hype online about the last book coming out this year, well, last year. And it had been a long time since I've read a Shadowhunters book. The original ones came out like when I was a teenager, so. And I did definitely enjoy it. It's definitely distinctively YA, but I did enjoy like the plot and the characters that were set up. Next is Cultish by Amanda Montell. This is a nonfiction book about the language of cults and how they use language to get what they want, as well as how non-cult entities like CrossFit or MLMs use kind of cultish sounding language to fulfill their needs as well. It was pretty well done. It was just a little bit forgettable, I would say. The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is a bit of a sort of generic revenge story where the main character's whole motivation and almost character is revenge, which is not something that is my favorite motivation, but I felt that like the world building and the way that the society was put together in terms of its like classes and their actual like physical differences was quite interesting, and I was pulled in enough to continue the series. Then we have Vita Nostra. This is honestly a bit of a fever dream. What I took from it is that it's essentially a dark academia flavored coming of age story, but I think you would have to read it and decide for yourself. The Kingdom of Copper. This is book 2 in the Daevabad trilogy. We return to Nari years later as she's trying to navigate the political stuff that's going on in Daevabad and do the best that she can for her people as well as the Shafit. I liked the way the politicking worked in this book as well as the plot development and Nari's development. Next is The Path of Daggers by Robert Jordan. Despite falling roughly in the kind of middle Wheel of Time section, I did enjoy this one. I felt that enough things happened to keep me entertained, and I really enjoyed Elaine's perspective in this book. I felt that she was finally given time to sort of grow and become her own character. Season of Storms by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is a Witcher book that doesn't involve Ciri, which is my favorite kind because I'm not very fond of her. I just enjoyed getting to see Geralt and his interactions with the other characters in the world. The plot in this one isn't necessarily the strongest, but it's just fun to see Geralt doing his thing, you know? Then we have Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the follow-up to Black Sun. It was still good, and I enjoyed the way that we got to spend some more time with our characters. However, it did suffer a little bit from middle book syndrome, and I didn't really like the way that one of our main characters' like trauma / backstory events was revealed. Next we have Priority of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a very political leaning fantasy book, and we're actually following women in power, which is nice because it's often men, and you know, sometimes you just had enough of them. This book is quite slow paced, which does allow for a lot of time with our characters, which I normally like, and I did like it. It's just that the pacing in this book is a bit whack because we spend all this time building it up and how evil and hard to beat this bad guy's gonna be, and then he's dead in like 5 pages. It's just like, what? Then we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a really interesting story about like a post-apocalyptic style world in which there is a like geological kind of magic, and the way the story is told I really enjoyed. We have 3 different perspectives, and the way that they finally weave together at the end is very satisfying. My only problem was that I just don't really like N.K. Jemisin's like writing style and the tone that she uses. Next is Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan. Wheel of Time could definitely be a few books shorter and benefit from it, but Winter's Heart does sort of begin a little bit to move out of the middle Wheel of Time slump where we have a few things happening, you know? We're sprinkling in some events now. I will say though that I do not like the way Jordan treats Min, especially like in this book and then like moving past this book. just kind of turns her into this like simpering girl who will do anything for the man she loves, even though that's not really the character that he set her up to be at the beginning. Next is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I'm sure you've all heard of this one. It's about an orc who starts up a coffee shop. I really enjoyed the details of hearing about the rebuilding of the coffee shop and the development of the menu. It was a very sweet and cozy time, but just not anything groundbreaking. The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. This follows kitchen boy Simon when he is suddenly thrust into a world of danger and magic. The beginning of this book is very slow. We spend a lot of time setting up Simon as a character, but once we get going, the plot really picks up and becomes very interesting with magic, a desperate flight across the country, and friendship. Next is Stone of Farewell by Tad Williams. This is the follow-up to Dragonbone Chair. The strength of this one is definitely the character work. It's quite slow moving. The plot doesn't move forward that much, but we get a lot of character development, as I said, and Simon is forced to become more than just the kitchen boy that he thought he was. Next is The Storm Before the Storm. This is a non-fiction book about the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire, and I really liked the way that the author told the story. He made the political figures almost seem like characters with little like quips about their personality and what they're kind of known for, and it made it a lot easier to remember all of the plethora of figures involved. Next is Sapiens. This is a non-fiction book about the development of humankind from our earliest beginnings to our great civilizations and our spread across the world. It did a great job of presenting the information in a digestible and like easily accessible way, and it was really good for listening to as an audiobook. Then we have Brothers of the Wind. This is a short book that's telling the story that's pretty important to the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy, as well as to The Last King of Osten Ard. I really liked that it was told from the perspective of the hero's page instead of the hero himself. I just felt it made it a lot more relatable, and the page's like character development was really interesting to see, which is not something we would have gotten from the hero's perspective. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This is a quite dark and gruesome book falling into the sort of grimdark fantasy genre, so there is a lot of sort of graphic violence, so be warned that those parts were not my favorite. However, despite how unlikable the characters are, like they're all flawed greatly, they were very well written, and I was invested in like what they were doing, and it sets up for a grand adventure and war in the next book. Then we have Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. This is book one of the Tawny Man trilogy. It has quite a slow beginning as we catch up with Fitz and see sort of what he's been doing since the events of the first trilogy. It does pick up a bit once we sort of leave Fitz's home and move into the wider world, and I really enjoyed seeing the dynamic between Fitz, Night Eyes, and the Fool again. Next is The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. I really enjoy how sort of like fun and fast-paced the first few books of Wheel of Time are. I don't know if fun is the right word. Like, they're fun to read. They might not be fun for the characters though, but I think the character development is good in this one as we sort of see Rand start to come to terms with who he is and how he's going to deal with that. After that, we have Eye of the World, also by Robert Jordan. I know book one of Wheel of Time is not everybody's favorite, but I really like the sort of pastoral and simple feel of it before we get into the complex and unique thing that is the rest of Wheel of Time. Next is Dragon Keeper by Robin Hobb. This is book one of the Rainwilds Quartet. I would say this book sets up the series perfectly, and I loved it more than I thought I would. It's a bit slow moving, as most of Hobb's books are, but it makes space for a lot of character work and allows them to bloom as we follow them on the adventure of a lifetime escorting misformed dragons up a perilous river into the unknown. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is very dark in tone. It is dark academia, so, you know, makes sense, but we're following a young girl who gets sucked into a world of magic and these secret societies after an incident in her old life, and I really enjoyed watching her backstory unravel and come to light as we explore the sort of seedy underbelly of some of these societies. Then we have Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is Secret Project number 1. And it's a very simple story at heart. We're following a young girl who goes to save her friend when it becomes apparent that nobody else will. And it's enriched by really interesting world building as well as a unique cast of characters. Following that is Yumi the Nightmare Painter, also by Brandon Sanderson. This is Secret Project number 3. And I would say the biggest strength of this book is probably the world building and the way in which Sanderson makes two worlds that seem totally separate come together both through the plot and the characters. Next up is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book puts atmosphere first to an extent I have not seen before, where the plot and the characters are definitely secondary to creating a vibe. And somehow it works spectacularly, drawing you into the world of the circus with the magic and mystique that goes along with it, and it is extremely sense evocative. I don't know if that's the right term. Reading experience. Next is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Live Ships Traders trilogy, and it sets us up with incredible world building, exploring the town of Bingtown and how it fits into the greater realm of the Elderlings world and the nearby cities. It also introduces our main characters with their own personal struggles, which will set the scene for the greater conflicts in the series. Next up is My Hygge Home by Mike Y. King. I think this is one of the most well-done nonfiction books I've ever read. It's a perfect blend of humor as well as information and just like little asides that are related to the topic, which is of course the Danish concept of hygge, which is slightly akin to holiness but different in its own way. An Immense World by Ed Young. This is a really interesting nonfiction book about the concept of the Umwelt, which is essentially just like an animal's sensory sort of world and how it perceives the world differently from humans. Next we have The Endurance. This is a nonfiction book about the story of the Antarctic voyage of the Endurance and everything that the crew did to survive and escape. It was very well put together, an amazing story of human endurance, and it worked very well as an audiobook. Next we have A City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is a nice deviation from the typical Western style fantasy. We're set in Cairo initially, and then moving into some fantasy realms that are sprinkled throughout sort of like Africa, Middle East sort of area. We're following a woman who is snatched away from her normal life and thrust into a magical world she didn't know existed and forced to become responsible for a tribe that she didn't even know was hers. And of course, don't forget a splash of romance. Next we have This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is one of the more unique things I read this year. It is a love story on multiple timelines told in short little scenes and letters that the characters write to each other, though they don't really even meet until the end. It's also around like 200 pages, so you have no excuse not to read it. The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is a very sort of greedy fantasy following a group of thieves who are breaking the rules of the thief overlord in their city to steal from the rich in elaborate ploys. I really like the character dynamic of our thief group, and it also contains a lot of really vivid descriptions of food and the city. Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the conclusion to the Tawny Man trilogy and a return to form for Hobb after Golden Fool. Fitz is caught between his loyalty to the Fool as well as to the Farseers, and he has to make a choice. It has some very heartbreaking scenes at the end and a bittersweet ending, which is Hobb's specialty. Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan. We are quickly moving out of the Wheel of Time slump. Our characters are starting to gear up for the last battle, and we have some really interesting progressions. I was sucked into the action and intrigue. City of Dragons by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Rainwild Chronicles, and it was from the sort of physical journey of moving upriver to a more mental and emotional journey as the keepers try to come to terms with who they are, where they are now, and deal with the problems that their dragons and their personal lives present. The reader can see trouble brewing downriver and beyond that our characters are going to have to face in the final book. Speaking of the final book, next we have Blood of Dragons by Robin Hobb, the conclusion to the Rainwild Chronicles. This is a very satisfying conclusion, and it wraps up all of the plot and character arcs in a satisfying way that combines wins with losses in a sort of realistic and balanced manner. As I said, it completes a lot of the character arcs in really satisfying ways, but also leaves room open for the rest of their characters' lives. It makes it seem like they continue on past this book. Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the follow-up to Shadow of the Gods, and I felt it really successfully expanded on the plot and characters of the first book. We get a few new point of views that sort of add more characters to our mix and show us why they made certain decisions that they did. This book features incredible action and sets us up nicely for the third book. Next is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a refreshing new take on fantasy that's set in a Native American inspired world where the gods just may take a hand in the things that are happening. It features really interesting world building and thorough character work as we explore the world from POVs of 3 very different characters. To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. This is the conclusion to the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. This wraps up the series in an epic way with battles and character growth and an expansion on the world building. I will say that how they wrap things up after the final battle is a little bit convenient, but the book is so good overall that I can allow it. Next is Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. This is the middle book of the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and it manages to avoid middle book syndrome. The plot continues at a good pace, and we learn more about our characters' backstories while they continue to grow and impact or react to the quest. Alright, we are at my top 3 now, although the first one, I just kind of didn't know where to put it, so I just kind of put it at the top. I don't know. It's gonna be there, okay? But anyway, number 3 on my list, we have Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is the conclusion to the Live Ship Traders trilogy. Hobb has a way of writing really satisfying endings that combine wins with losses in a way that wraps up the characters while leaving space for them to continue their lives and making the ending feel very almost kind of bittersweet, because it's like you get these highs and you also get some really low lows, and they balance themselves to make each of them stronger, I guess. Number 2 is Dragonhaven, also by Robin Hobb. This wraps up the first half of the series in a very satisfying way while setting up for the second half. It features a large cast of very complex and believable characters, and also dragons. Alright, and then in the number 1 spot, kind of by default, we have Fellowship of the Ring. You know what this is about. An ancient wizard conscripts a bunch of short people to go on a quest to throw an evil ring into a pit of fire. Alright, that is everything that I read this year. I won't make this conclusion too long because I've already talked for a while, but I hope that your reading year was as good as mine and that you met whatever goals you wanted to. But that is all that I have time for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.